I welcome you in lecture 19 regarding legal compliance for incorporating startup, and I am in the module of financing and legal compliance. And to be more specific, I am going to talk with you type of instrument for raising the fund. And when I am using this particular word type of instrument for the raising of fund, you possibly can understand that I am only talking about the companies. Because if you remember my first lecture in this particular module, I have said that which organization can access what kind of fund, and when we are using the word the raising the fund or instrument using raising the fund, we are basically indicating either a private placement or a public primary market. And these particular type of fund or these two particular type of market only can be accessed by the companies, not by any other organization. So, whatever the discussion which we are going to do relating to the raising of fund or issuing of the instrument, it is basically for the companies. Now, I have provided a diagram here. This is not made by me, but I have taken from somewhere else. Wherein it indicates that what the sources Indian company may raise the fund, or rather it basically indicate the the places from where you can go for raising the fund. And if you look into this particular diagram, it is distinctly divided into two categories. One is the domestic source, another is a foreign source. So, let me explain to you first the domestic source and then I will come to the foreign source. Now, in case of a domestic source, you can go for a public issue, and which I was discussing with you in detail in the previous after this particular lecture, next lecture I am going to talk with you in detail. And in the public issues, you will find there is a two kind of issue is possible. One is a initial public offer, another is a follow on public offer. Now, under the initial public offer, again you will find this is a issue to the public. That means you basically make an allotment to any people who are shown their interest to subscribe your shares, or it can be offer for sale. An offer for sale is generally happen through the issuing houses. Whereas, again in case of a follow-up public offer, that means you have already gone to the public issue and then you wanted to again go to market to raise a further capital. When I am talking here a market, please do remember this is a primary market. So, in that case also again you can go to issue the public, or you might go for offering the sale through the issuing house. Now, issuing house are those particular houses who basically help in case of the small issue. That means you basically allot all the issue to one or two houses, and they in terms going to sell this particular share based on certain terms and condition to the public. Now, apart from that, you can do the right issue. Right issue means whoever is holding the shares in your company, you generally again issue some number of shares to them in proportion. That means, if he is holding a 1 share, you can issue 2 share to that particular person. So, it is a 1:2 kind of a ratio that you might get, or there can be a preferential issues. Preferential issues are generally happen for a particular group of people, mainly those people who are in the management. So, you wanted to give kind of a preference to these particular people by issuing a number of shares. But even it might also happen to the financial institution also who has made the investment in your company, and you need a further fund and you want to raise it through these particular preferential issues. Now, when we are talking about this IPO and follow-up public offer, please remember this can be for any kind of instrument, now which we have discussed in subsequent part of my lecture. That means, it can be either equity shares, or it can be a preference shares, it can be debentures, it can be bonds, it can be even the deposits, whatever the instrument you use for raising this particular capital. Now, when we are talking about the foreign source, there is a lot of restriction for accessing the foreign source. Now, in case of the foreign source, the first thing is that you can go for a foreign direct investment. Now, foreign direct investment, again, it can be through the public issue, right issue, or preferential issues, and this is guided by again your FIPB regulation, that means foreign in the foreign institutional promotion board, or it might be through the RBI regulations, or it might be even the capital market regulator also prescribes some kind of regulation. So, wherein the foreign investor basically bring the fund and make an investment in your company, and there you can go for all this kind of issue, either it can be a public issue, right issues, or preferential issues, like if they wanted to increase their stake, if they wanted to go for refinancing this particular company, or they wanted to bring debt investment for furthering a particular project, or maybe addressing the need for the immediate fund requirement. So, in those particular cases they can go for any of them. Apart from that, there is a concept called ADR or GDR, which is basically known as depository receipt. By issuing this particular depository receipt, you can again access the foreign market, and I am going to discuss about this ADR and GDR little later part of my lecture today. This is the full form of ADR is American Depository Receipt, and the full form of GDR is Global Depository Receipt. Now, there can be ECB, that means external commercial borrowing. These are basically in form of a debt, or there can be FCCB, that means this is again a form of a debt, and wherein you basically want to raise not the equity, but you raise the capital through the debt instrument. Now, let me take you to the next point of the discussion is what are the capital instrument. Now, capital instrument can be divided in broad category, two broad category. One is the equity shares, another is the preference shares. Now, equity shares are those shares who actually have a right over the management. That means, if you are holding a equity shares, then in that case you have a right to vote. The moment you have a right to vote, that means you can elect that who will be in the board of directors of this particular company. So, that means equity shareholders are generally have a management right over that particular company. Now, whenever again equity shares can be a general equity, or it can be a differential equity. Now, general equity means it is the same class of people, that means you will get one vote. At the same time there will be fixed rate of dividend. Now, when you are talking about the differential equity, in that particular case it might vary, the voting right might vary, as well as the equity payment of the dividend also varies, but there is some kind of a restriction. That means you can only issue the differential equity after you are continuing in a some number of years in the market. Before that you cannot issue the differential equity, but you will find that in India still differential equity did not really accepted very nicely by the investors. So, you will find very few companies generally go for issuing these particular differential equity. Now, in the preference shares, you will find these particular shares generally get a preference in the payment of the dividend, at the same time in the payment of at the time of winding up, they get the preference relating to payment of the capital back. So, they are little different from the equity shares, but one thing is that they do not have a voting right in general working of the company or general management of the company, unless there is some specific issues which is affecting the right of the preference shares holder. So, again preference shares can be divided into a 4 category. It can be redeemable preference shares, it can be cumulative preference shares, it can be non-cumulative preference share, and it is a participatory preference shares. Now, when I am talking about redeemable preference shares, that means all the preference shares after some point of time you need to be redeemed. That means you need to pay back the money which you have raised through this particular preference shares, and then you have to take that particular preference share back. So, that is what called a redeemable preference shares. Now, cumulative preference share means where there is a fixed rate of a dividend has been promised, and that particular dividend keep on accumulating if there is a declaration of the dividend, or even if there is no declaration of the dividend in a particular year, and then if you are going for a next year, then you have to pay back those particular year dividend. That means, if you are not paid a dividend in previous year, you need to pay that particular dividend in the next year when you are paying the dividend to the shareholder. Now, non-cumulative means it do not accumulate, that means dividend do not accumulate. And when we are talking about the participatory preference share, it means that you are going to get the normal rate of dividend as it is promised at the time of issuing of this preference shares. But in addition to that, if anything has been left out after making the payment to the equity shareholders, then that might be distributed, or that or you might be allowed to participate in similar manner as the equity shareholder got this particular dividend. So, these are the instrument which you might use for raising the fund. This is the capital instrument which you can use for raising this particular fund. Now, while you are going to issue this particular instrument, please do consider about the management control. Please do consider about what your cost of the fund, that means what you are getting by making an investment in this fund, or are you sharing a more dividend or more profit with the investors, or is it going to be a beneficial for you in terms of a development. Sometimes you should remember that if you are not choose the right instrument for your organization, it might create a financial hardship for you, because you might be paying more than whatever you should pay as a startup. Then the next aspect of capital instrument which we have discussed before, we have referred before, is a convertible debenture. Convertible debenture is basically a mix of debt instrument as well as the equity instrument. Now, that means you initially issue this particular instrument as a debt instrument, but you give the option that after completion of a specific time period, the person who is holding the instrument, he has the option to exercise to convert that particular instrument as a equity instrument or continue at a debt instrument. So, that is the reason it called a convertible. So, you can convert this particular debt instrument into the equity. Now, this is quite good for private equity fund, or maybe the venture capitalist, or maybe the institutional investor, because if they are not sure initially that how you are going to grow in the market, or you have enter into a market which is not yet defined, or you are created a very niche in a particular market, and they are not sure about how market is react over your venture, then in that case they generally prefer to make an investment through this particular convertible debenture, because initially it is secure, because it is a credit instrument, that means it is a debt instrument. So, there is a kind of a charge which they can create by subscribing this particular instrument on your asset, and at the same time when you are growing, or if you are going for IPO, they can capitalize over this particular instrument by issuing the by selling it in the open market once this particular IPO is settled, or you have gone to the secondary market. Now, again as I have talked with you a little before relating to the global depository receipt. Global depository receipt are basically used for accessing the market which are beyond America. That means any other international market except the America, we generally use global depository receipt, and this is mainly for the European countries who use this particular global depository receipt. Now, depository receipt means you are basically issuing your equity to a custodian, and the custodian in terms issuing the depository receipt of the deposit which you have depository received against the equity which you have issued, and that particular depository receipt in terms is been listed into that particular market where it has been issued. So, it is issued actually in the primary market. So, anybody can subscribe this particular instrument in that particular primary market, and they can again sell this particular instrument into that secondary market if it has been listed in that particular market. So, global depository receipt actually helped in transporting the fund from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction in a most safest manner. And please do remember, this is also important because many of the country are not capital convertible. That means, you can really do not able to bring the raw money from one country to another country. That means, if you wanted to bring euro in India, you are not allowed to do that, because India is not a capital convertible country. So, in that circumstances, you possibly need to have a global depository receipt to be issued. Now, the mechanism of American depository receipt are also the same, but it is only issued in case of America, and it is issued only in American dollar. So, again the custodians are there, custodian issue the depository receipt, and that particular depository receipt is subscribed by the investor in the primary market, and these particular depository receipts are listed in a stock exchange, and then they can be traded into that particular stock exchange. So, in both the cases of either global depository receipt or American ADR American depository receipt, the liquidity, market liquidity is very high. And nowadays, even you will find in Indian regulator are giving a more right to this particular depository holder, like they have allowed to vote by this particular depository holder in selection of the board member, like any shareholder in the domestic jurisdiction. So, popularity of these particular instrument are increasing over the years, and Indian companies will find more and more going to the overseas market to accessing the cheap fund, which is already available or which is already stacked in somewhere, and they wanted to access this particular thing. Now, India also started with its own depository receipt called Indian depository receipt. That means, some of the foreign company are accessing the Indian market to raise their fund. So, this is basically a reverse trend, and India has also defined this how in what condition this Indian depository receipt can be issued to the foreign by the foreign company in Indian market. Now, let me take you to next. Let me take you to the next slide, which is talking about the debt instrument or the debt capital. Now, it comprises of debentures, different kind of debt, corporate bonds, and the deposit. Now, debt capital are generally raised by the people for the working capital or the short term capital, or if they wanted to have a cheap capital or easy accessibility of this particular capital, then they generally go for a debt capital. Now, debt are can be raised directly from the financial institution, which I have talked with you, or you might go to the primary market, or even through the private placement you can raise this particular debt. And the interesting part in case of the debt instrument is that you have a lot of flexibility to design around. So, if somebody asks you that how many types of a debt instruments are available in Indian market, possibly it is very difficult to count it. Even people keep on innovating in the debt market. Like let me give you some example. Like there is a deep discount bond. Now, in deep discount bond, what you do, you generally issue this particular instrument in a highly discounted rate, maybe the cost of the instrument is 10 rupees and you are issuing that particular instrument in 2 rupees. But at the time of the maturity, you are going to pay only you are going to pay the full amount of this particular value of the instrument or face value of the instrument. So, you are going to pay the 8 rupees against the 2 rupees which you have taken as an investment. So, like that, and this is a unsecured debt, that means it is not creating any charge over the assets of this company. So, you will find based on the requirement which you have in that particular segment or type of the risks which you have in the business, you can keep on designing this particular instrument, and that is that is where the debt instrument is quite popular. And in generally people raise this particular instrument for the short term or for the working capital. So, what also people try to find out that it should be cheaper in compared to the equity, because in case of the equity, if you are issuing, you cannot redeem the equity or you cannot take it back the equity after certain point of time. So, what you need to do, you need to keep on paying the dividend until that particular person is going to sell that particular equity if you are going for a buyback, and buyback also not a easy job, it is a very difficult job and you need to follow certain rules for the buyback. Now, buyback means where the company is purchase its own equity from the secondary market. Now, that is in case of the debt, this flexibility is there. If you think that well, now we do not require that particular debt, you can pay back that particular debt after completion of that particular certain time, and it is actually address your need whatever you require at that particular point of time. So, in some of the in some cases corporate also allowed to issue the deposits, and these are known term deposit. That means, for a specific period of time the deposit is issued by the corporates to the people, and on the maturity you can get the principal as well as the interest on that particular deposit. Now, as I have talked with you, there are convertible instruments are getting more and more popular today, and there is a number of convertible instrument which you are finding in the market today. And this convertible instrument may be the convert of preference shares to the equity shares, because as I told you that in case of preference shares you do not have a voting right, whereas in case of the equity shares you have a voting right, or even you might earn a more against your investment, because if the dividend are generally paid higher in case of the equity shareholder in compared to preference shareholder, because preference shareholder generally get the equity in a specific amount, which is not so in case of equity shareholders. Now, there is a convertible equities you can find. Convertible equities are generally if they are giving some kind of a right, I mean specific right, like managerial right in terms of differential equity, or there can be other specific kind of right which is attached with this particular equity, or there can be some class of the equity which can be issued with the permission of the regulator to a specific group of people. Similarly, there can be a convertible bond and preference shares, and there can be a bond with the management rights. Now, these bonds with the management right is very uncommon, and it is basically prohibited by the Companies Act at present. But you will find when these public financial institutions are making a huge investment through this particular bond, they basically try to ensure kind of right of over the management, like if there is a major decision has been taken by the management relating to change of the business or restructuring of the business, then in that case they need to go back to these financial institutions or the bondholder, and they need to take the permission from this bondholder. So, even though it is not allowed in voting right is not allowed, a debenture is not allowed to issue with the voting right, but you will find some kind of negative right has been infused today, through the process of the agreement while they are issuing these particular debentures. So, these are the basically the different form of the debenture which instrument which you will found and which generally people use for raising the fund from the primary market or through the private placement or through the negotiated investment, which I have discussed in the last lecture. Thank you. ঠিক আছে।